Our unit was a COVID unit, working through all of that. And I think that was also one of the big pushes for me to leave. Was I was honestly so exhausted. I was like, there's got to be something different. And I had reached a point in my mind where I said, I've had this idea. I'd started kind of like mulling around business models on my days off. And I was like, this is it. This is the time. Like, if I don't try now, I'll never know. And I just don't ever want to live with the regret of not at least trying.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Ever wondered what happens when nurses step up to solve healthcare's biggest challenges? Today's guest turned a problem she experienced personally into a groundbreaking healthcare company that would become the solution. I'm excited to welcome Jasmine Bhatti, who has been a nurse for almost 14 years and is the founder of Navi Nurses. In just 4 years, Jasmine has turned an idea into a multi-million-dollar company that's expanding access to private duty nursing care. She's won a $1.5 million Reimagining Nursing Award and was named 2024 Female Founder of the Year by the Phoenix Business Journal. From burnt-out COVID nurse to innovative entrepreneur, Jasmine's story shows what's possible when nurses recognize their true worth. Jasmine, welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside.
Oh, Audrey, thank you so much for having me. I'm just delighted to be here and share my story, but also talk more about what you're trying to highlight, which are just all these incredible opportunities that nurses have outside of the bedside.
All of these different opportunities that are out there for us. I think that we know of some options, but the options that we really have are just so vast that I think a lot of them are just not recognized. So I'm excited to share kind of the path that you figured out for yourself and the incredible success that you've had along the way. If you want to get us started by just kind of sharing us, we'll go back to kind of your early nursing days. What was it that drew you to nursing in the first place, and what was that initial experience?
Yeah, so actually I was never one of those people that was like, I'm going to become a nurse. I didn't grow up with nurses in my family. I was never called to become a nurse. But when I was in college, I always knew I was meant to do something in healthcare and impact healthcare at a larger level. And so I had thought that applying to law school and taking a health policy route would actually lead to the change that I was hoping to see for people, obviously through policy. But in school, when I was in college, my grandmother was diagnosed with head and neck cancer. And the docs told my family and I, you can either put her in skilled nursing or you can take her home. And so after just seeing a few places, we were like, we are not putting her in skilled nursing. We're going to take her home. And it was like I became a nurse overnight because she had a trach and a peg and wounds and all the things while on chemotherapy, and just learning what nurses really do, because I had no idea. Like so many other people, we have media that just shows nurses and portrays nursing as you're either a sexy nurse or nurse ratchet, or this is what people think. And I didn't know, right? But when I got to work with the nurses firsthand, I was like, this is what I meant to be doing. And so that entire experience is really the foundation for why I'm a nurse, but it's also the foundation for the business I built, because I'm building something that I wish I had access to as a family member who was exhausted and always unsure if I was doing the right thing.
Hmm. Yeah. And, it's really neat that your journey really started with such a personal experience. You really got to feel and experience that pain point that you're now getting to solve, which I'm sure, looking back must feel pretty fulfilling to be able to say, okay, I went from like feeling this and experiencing it with my own family to now having this business where I know that me and my nurses are now serving families in a way that, like, we wish we had that support back in the day.
Oh, yeah, and it's like this kind of full circle moment on so many different levels. So, like, my grandmother, she was being treated at Mayo Clinic, and I spent my last 8 years working on the same floor where my grandmother was taken care of. So to be able to work alongside the same nurses who had taught me, it was, like, such a gift. And then, like, that whole experience of being there really taught me about exceptional and high quality care. And again, like that full circle moment, we were the first nurse-led company to go through the Mayo Clinic MedTech Accelerator. And so it's funny when you look back and you reflect on things and how they happen in your life. And for me, it just kind of like everything is fitting together and like it's just weaving this beautiful story.
Absolutely. And we're going to get more into like the actual like business and the building of your business and like private duty nursing and what that really means. And so I think that it's great like to start we're really talking about like what these pain points are. And you also had this experience working at the bedside like as a charge nurse, right? And I believe like you would get calls from patients and families after discharge with questions. And of course, we try to give our patients everything they need before we send them off. But there's always going to be more questions as like things progress day by day, things happen, things change, things come up. So, how did that experience really shine a light on kind of the need for what Navi Nurses now offers?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure like many nurses can relate to this, right? Like we've all had patients tug at our scrubs and say like, "Hey, can you come home with me?" That you connect with them and it's beautiful and they want you to be involved in their care. And when I was working as a charge nurse specifically at night, I would, get these calls back from people saying like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot what the nurse told me." And the pharmacy didn't have this. And like there were all these issues with coordinating things for them. And like going home from the hospital, that's like the most fragile part in my belief of our healthcare system is that we're sending
Hmm.
people home who they're so overwhelmed. They're probably sleep deprived, on medication. Like there's so much happening and they're adjusting to a new way of being. Even as like people ourselves, for ourselves and our loved ones, we've experienced this. So we know that. But it wasn't until I really dug into the data with one of the local hospitals here to really look at like most of these calls that are coming back from people, it's within the first 10 hours of being discharged. And so there's this gap that we're actually like seeing. And so like it just highlighted this problem that despite all our best effort, like it's really hard to set people up for the success that they need to really get themselves like in the best place set up for success.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's scary. I mean, it's scary being a patient when like something is going on with you or a family member, but it's even scarier to leave kind of the security blanket that really nursing care is in the inpatient setting, and there's like a million decisions that any individual nurse makes on a day-to-day basis about, the order of operations for what they're going to do for that patient that day, their medications and side effects and interactions and like all of this. So it's really, I mean, an incredible burden for a family and like a home caregiver to take on. From that like charge nurse experience, you did pursue your PhD. Talk to me a little bit about like what your goal was in making that decision.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I started, first of all, like my mentors will hate this, but I'm an 8 year struggling PhD student because it's really hard to build a business and try to work on your doctorate at the same time. So I don't
I
really
can't
recommend that.
imagine.
But at that time when I started, I had been working in the hospital and I was still going back to that idea of like, I love caring for 4 or 5 people at a time, but like I'm meant to be doing something bigger. And so I just went on LinkedIn and I was like, all right, who are the nurses running hospitals? How did they get to where they're at? What is their education needed? And I was like, oh, this is it. I need like a doctorate to run a hospital. And maybe that was my path. And so I was laying the foundation to grow in a leadership role. And, the universe guided me in a whole different direction of where to take things. But what's been really helpful about that doctoral process is I've learned so much. It's taught me to think differently. And that's actually what helped get me in the position to be able to apply for this grant that we ended up winning, right? Like a $1.5 million grant. And it's like the other people that were awarded this for like Ohio State and Emory University and just amazing organizations. And then there's like Jasmine with like a team of like less than a few that won this massive grant to manage. So, I mean, I think although I'm still working on it and I've collected the data, I just need to sit and write now. But it's been a really integral part of how I've grown, and it's opened up doors for me along the way that I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity to really walk through.
Yeah, I mean, it is bold to be enrolled in a PhD program and be building your own business. That sounds like more than the average person might be able to handle. But that I'm sure is just a huge growing and learning opportunity. I always love to kind of unpack the decision making around like what landed you on the particular path that you're on. And like for you, it was like nursing, leadership. Actually, I'm going to build my own company. Like, what did that look like for you? Were there certain events that guided you in that direction? How did you end up getting there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I have to go back to my grandmother, right? Like that whole instance was what's really led and guided everything that I'm doing now and even how I'm building now. But I'm always of the mindset that like explore and open and see what things come your way and decide whether you want to take it. So kind of like I see life as just this constant like choose your adventure, right? And so if you put yourself out into the world and you're looking for opportunities to just be curious, like just really lean into your curiosity, things will appear and you just get to go with whatever feels right. And I think as nurses, like we're so intuitive and we know so much more than we give ourselves credit for. And I think the right things will kind of happen. And so for me, how things really transitioned from the bedside to hospital was as a PhD student, I was taking my ASU 101 students around to like learn about the college and university. And we stopped at this place called the HEAL Lab, which is the Health, Entrepreneurship, and Accelerator Labs at ASU. And this professor was talking about all the amazing things happening in healthcare and all the innovation. And I was thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, like I have ideas. I was always a nurse that had a book of like all the things I wanted to change and do differently. And so I emailed him like that night when I got home and I was like, hey, I know you told the students to come in. I'm not necessarily like one of these students, but will you sit down and talk to me? And he literally changed my life. So this professor started opening up doors. He connected me with the law students at ASU to help starting writing like contracts. He connected me with engineers in the engineering school to help start building technology, like connected me in with a startup community. And the startup community here in Arizona is phenomenal. Like I couldn't imagine building anything anywhere else. But it's kind of like one person leads you to the next. And when you start to find your group of people, I feel like your people are always surrounded by like that same quality of like amazing, beautiful humans, and just magic happens if you just lean into that curiosity.
That's incredible. And I, again and again, find myself catching on to this same common theme throughout a lot of the guests that I have on this podcast of just kind of saying yes and exploring opportunity, following like your intuition, your passion, your curiosity, and really just like leaning into those like mentors and like helpful people that you find along the way. And I think that it's really inspiring that you took the initiative to like reach out and say, hey, like I do have ideas. Cause something I think you touched on just a minute ago is like nurses tend to like underestimate our value and potential. Um
Oh, yes,
yeah,
that
I
is
mean
my soapbox.
yes. So I want you to get on that soapbox. I like saw your expression. I see all the thoughts. Let's hear them.
Yeah, I mean, and we onboard nurses to our team every month. So we just do like one onboarding every month. And at the end of the onboarding session, we ask our nurses to list out their accomplishments. We have them watch this little video that talks about value as like just this, like to set the stage. And we ask them to write out all their accomplishments as a nurse. And we don't hire nurses who have less than 4 years of experience. So our nurses range from 4 to like 25 years plus of experience. And in all of this time, there's not been one onboarding session where I have seen more than 8 accomplishments from a nurse. And it makes me cry every time because I watch these nurses who they have the pen and paper and they're thinking and they're thinking and they're struggling to find something to write down. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like these nurses are so accomplished, and they don't even see and value it in themselves. It breaks my heart. And so that's really important to me and our organization and our philosophy is like really highlighting that nurses are worthy and really speaking to that because, when we work in organizations where you get emails every week of like, oh, your med scan rate was 85% this week and you clocked in and out like 5 minutes late here. Like it's all the negative that we hear. And I don't think that they see all of the small accomplishments and the big ones too. Like I caught a med error, like I made sure the patient went home with these things. Like those things are really big accomplishments. So it's not just degrees, it's not just certifications, it's not what the world tells us. I think that's so important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, clinically, there's a lot that you just mentioned that kind of gets taken for granted, both like on the unit and therefore like kind of in our own minds of like, yeah, we're doing our job, but as a nurse that like there is a difference in the way that you can show up for your patients and recognizing when that's happening like you were really there for a family or you did catch that med error or you caught on to this like subtle change in their assessment or vital signs and you called the doctor and like it changed everything. Like these are things
Yeah.
that we do every single day that just kind of like get lumped into I did my job today. And I think that that's so important to call out, but also in addition to those clinical things are the underlying like soft skills that are just necessary for us to be able to show up and do our job every day. The critical thinking, the prioritization, the working under pressure in a fast-paced environment. Like we're learning something new like every single shift we clock in pretty much. So like all of
Yeah.
these things like play into making us very valuable, well-rounded professionals, but if you ask a nurse to like list out some of like their best skills, these things hardly ever come up because they're things that we don't necessarily think about at the bedside. It's just like they're the skills that are there that get us through our day. And so I think it's really important to highlight that those things too are so important and we are very skilled at those things because of our nursing experience.
Exactly. No, I think that that's so true. And to kind of add into that, when we don't recognize our own worth, I think what's happening is that we can't communicate that value that we provide truly to people. Like, and I think part of our nature as nurses, we are like guardians, right? Like we are their guardians. We shield them from things that maybe they don't need to know about, or we don't want to stress them out about more. Like that's not what they need to be focusing on. They need to be focusing on healing. But in doing these things, like in undervaluing ourselves, we're not letting the public, the average person, really see the importance of like our role and how that really impacts how they recover.
So true. Yeah. So all of these things that we've just talked about, I know also play into being an entrepreneur. And, I mentioned, how impressive I think that initiative is to like reach out and like really just take this step of like, okay, I have this idea, I see this problem to solve, like I'm going to go do it. And it sounds like you had an incredible person who was able to connect you with all kinds of resources and like the network that could really support you through this. But I know that building a business and being an entrepreneur is very challenging, and learning all of the things that you need to know is very hard. Describe to me kind of like what those early days of building the business looked like and felt like for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first started, it was still like the tail end of COVID, right? So I was working through COVID. Our unit was a COVID unit, working through all of that. And I think that was also one of the big pushes for me to leave was I was honestly so exhausted. I like was like, there's got to be something different. And I had reached a point in my mind where I said, I've had this idea. I'd started kind of like mulling around business models on my days off. And I was like, this is it. This is the time. Like, if I don't try now, I'll never know. And I just don't ever want to live with the regret of not at least trying. And the great thing about nursing is there's so much security, right? I was like, well, if I fail, if it doesn't work out, like I can just get a job quickly back again, like no problem.
Yes.
The risk is
Hmm.
so low for me, like I can integrate back in easily. And so having that cushion just was like, okay, I can do this. So I just started on like Facebook, just posting, hey, I'm starting a company. And then before I knew it, I had a few people reaching out and they're like, oh, I have someone you can care for. And when I got to a point where we had our very first like big customer, I had kind of calculated out, okay, I think I can make this work because I was working in the hospital and on my days off, I was working on the business and taking care of clients and doing all the things. But I knew that I needed to step away entirely from the hospital, making this full time to really give it like the flame it needed to grow into something. So I set the decision of like, I'm going to put in my resignation notice April Fool's Day, like April 1st. So I did. I had that date set in mind and I had kind of planned out like, okay, this is like financially how I can make it work. And that let me just jump straight from the bedside into building this. And in the beginning, it's hard, right? You wear every single hat. I went from being a bedside nurse to understanding payroll, accounting, like finance, HR, marketing, sales, all the things. And in the beginning, you're like learning all of everything. And kind of going back to like this startup community here, I had joined a few different programs that were online in our community that just taught so much about business basics. And I started meeting people. And so as I was going through these growing points, I had people I could connect to and be like, hey, I'm going through this. What do you recommend? Or what do you suggest? And so I was never really alone in the challenges. And they still exist. Even like this is 4 years later, I still have challenges that I'm working through, but there are different sorts of challenges now. And I have a whole group of new people that I can turn to because like, as you know, in startups, like there's different phases of growing and different things happen. And so you just, things change, like our roles change. And as a CEO of a company, I've gone from doing everything from taking care of the patients, billing invoices, now like stepping into the role of a CEO and like building a brand and a company. And so there's just been this incredible evolution for me over the last 4 years. And it's crazy to kind of sit back and think on it. And so I think what's really exciting about that is there's so much potential for evolution as a person, but also like professionally in building and stepping away and building something like it's incredible. You're going to be so proud of yourself when you do it.
Yes. And honestly, in the grand scheme of things, 4 years is no time at all to have accomplished everything that you have. I mean, to go from like I'm still working at the bedside and kind of building my business on the side to where you are now is really remarkable. And so I just want to like highlight that because I mean, you described some of this, but you're really everything you're doing, you're learning how to do it as you go. and, achieving each like benchmark of success along the way, just I'm sure powers you through the next challenge. And so cool that you've had such a strong network to help you through some of those like challenges and barriers. What like something that I think is just beautiful about nursing and our 3-day schedule, or what is it, typical 3-day schedule, is that ability of having 4 days a week to work on other things before you're really having to leave one thing for the other. What was the threshold for you that, I mean, I know you had like April Fool's Day kind of like bookmarked, but like, was there a specific threshold where you were like, okay, I'm going to be comfortable making this leap if I have 5 clients, or, I have enough clients to need to hire on another nurse? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I think it wasn't well, I don't know if it was necessarily a threshold per se, but it was more of like, I just have to take the leap. I have to be courageous. I've got to just set a date. And I had saved up enough that I was like, okay, I've got some months leeway in case anything happens. But we had grown from like by the time that I was ready to go, it was our third client. And at that point, I was like, okay, I knew that we would have this client for a while. And there was like some security in knowing that, okay, like I can continue doing this. And on the off chance, like if nothing happened, like I can take care of these clients on my own. By our third client, we had probably 18 nurses on the team. So
Oh,
I had
wow.
to grow really fast. And I just was like, well, if anything, I can cut back on bringing on more nurses. I can take care of people myself to make sure that I'm covered and I'm still learning. Because when you're in the weeds and you're learning all of these, you're learning processes and building them. It's like you're building the plane and flying it at the same time. And so you're not just doing the work, you are doing the work and also laying the foundation for how do I want this to continue to be? What are the processes and procedures that need to be in place? And so it's really important for the founder to be involved in all of these aspects because you're writing the playbook and
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to write it unless you do the thing really yourself. So I can tell you I've like done every role in my company so far, pretty much, other than working through HubSpot because I do not know HubSpot. Otherwise, yeah.
That's awesome. And I want to get a little bit more in detail about private duty nursing and what that really means for both patients and their families, what it means for nurses as far as like a different type of career opportunity. Tell us a little bit more just kind of about that whole landscape.
Yeah, so I mean, private duty nursing has existed for all these years, right? But I don't think for whatever reason the general public knows that it's even an option for them. And they don't again know why a nurse would be valuable for them or how they could really make an impact in their healthcare. And so that as a whole, as a profession, a really big area of opportunity that we have as far as just sharing with the world, especially with healthcare going in the direction where it is, where people are having maybe not quite so much access to the care that they really need. We can really make a difference there. And, just in hindsight, I would have changed my practice as a nurse at the bedside had I known the things that I see now. So, for example, when someone gets discharged from the hospital and they go home on home health, I was always like, oh, home health has it. They're fine. They're going to be okay. But they're not. Like, they're really not. Insurance only covers a very small portion. And there's one
Mm,
particular client we had that I'll never forget. He had cancer and a fever of unknown origin. And he was frail, obviously, with the cancer. And in his like late 70s. And he, because of this fever of unknown origin, he had a PICC line and went home with 3 different types of IV antibiotics. And one was every 8 hours, one was every 24 hours, and one was every 12 hours. So he had to give himself 3, 4, 5, 6 different medications or six different administrations every day. And if you haven't looked at the steps, it's like 52 steps for them to connect and disconnect and do all the things. And he had to do that 6 times a day, which was so stressful for him and his family. And because he's on Medicare, he only qualified for one nursing visit a week. And that nursing visit was really to draw his labs, check his PICC line, make sure everything is okay. And so this person is left now 7 days a week to follow these steps and with poor vision and arthritis, and his family
That's
couldn't really
scary.
help him. It's so scary, right? And so we don't set people up for success.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
wish I would have known that. I wish I would have known that as a nurse, because I would have said, like, hey, look into private duty nursing, or hey, I really think you should benefit from care, even caregiving, right? Someone to help them with their ADLs at home. Like, people who are older, they need more support. And I just don't think that they're aware that it's even available to them, and just really how important it is for them to at least know that it's there. And if they can access it, like, at least it's an option for them to have a better quality of life.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you go about matching the nurses that you have on staff with clients and their needs?
Yeah, so this is what I love, like, so much about our work, is that we take a very human-centered approach. We see, like, what we call human essence, right? Which is the person, their environment, their, like, spirituality, and their connection. And so when we match the nurses with the clients, we're really looking at things like religion, especially at end of life, like
Mm,
culture, language, the things that really matter to us, that we know in the science that says, someone who's Black, who's being cared for by a Black healthcare provider, they're going to have a better outcome. Like, why can't we make that possible for people? And so we take those factors into consideration, and the nurses ultimately decide whether they want to take the shift or not. We leave that up to them. But we first want to make it available to people who most closely resonate with what that person needs, whether it's their specialty or something about them as a human that is really important to consider.
I love that human essence consideration. I think that is just so important. And I mean, it's really just kind of like it's the holistic picture that unfortunately, like in a traditional like bedside role, you often like don't get the opportunity to really consider all of that and like patient nurse assignments. It more just comes down to like, black and white
I'm here.
numbers. um so so I think that that's really cool, both for the patient and their family and for the nurse to be able to
Yeah.
have just the flexibility and just a choice in the matter, and being able to choose a patient who you are really going to be able to form that connection with. Because I think that that patient nurse connection is something that many nurses are missing in their bedside roles, because we are so overburdened with like administrative things, we're short staffed, things are always hurried, and you miss getting to form that like bond with your patient and the family. So I'm sure that that has to feel great for the nurses as well.
Oh, it does. Yeah, it's incredible, actually. So with the grant, we've got this study that we're running, and we're collecting data, and part of it is collecting information from the nurses about their experience in this sort of work. And that's one of the things we kept hearing just over and over again, is they feel like in this sort of situation where it's not dictated by insurance, right? So that's the beauty of private pay, is people walk into someone's home and they were like, what can I help you with? And they're not following, this is exactly what I need to do and I have to leave. They're like
Hmm.
there for that person, and they co-create what that visit looks like. But in talking to the nurses, they just keep saying it like, I have this intimate connection. I can connect with people, and I can finally do what I always thought I was going to do as a nurse. Like, that is just incredible. Like, we are helping these nurses go back to, like, that feeling of like, aha, this is why I wanted to become a nurse. Like, this is the nurse I thought I was going to become. And it just had been so beautiful to watch how, when we change the model of how we allow nurses to practice, letting them be autonomous, letting them provide care that they're proud of, like, that's really all it takes to let us
Hmm.
love what we do again, which is incredible.
Yeah, I think what you just said is really important. And I recall the days that I clocked out for a shift and I left the hospital feeling really good of like, I love my job. I love being a nurse. Those were the days where I was working with a patient or a family where we really connected. Maybe there were some moments throughout the day where I had extra time and maybe I, was able to just go the extra mile for them. And I think that it's true for a lot of nurses that that's who we want to be. Like that's who we want to show up. That's how we want to
Mhm.
show up for our patients. So it's really special, I think, that you've kind of created this environment where that's possible.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. And I think one of the other really profound things along the way is that when we onboard a client, one of the first things we ask them is, what do you want? And it's amazing how oftentimes we hear from people like, gosh, nobody's ever asked me what I want. Like, I don't know what I want. Like, they've not had even time to think about it because they're constantly told what to do.
Yes. The lack of autonomy that you feel as a patient in our healthcare system sometimes is scary. It makes you nervous, it makes you feel anxious, you feel like you are not fully in control. So yeah, I mean, we as clinicians, I think because of the system that we work in and how quickly we need to get things done and the number of patients that we have, it's like we kind of go through these motions and like we make decisions that are good for a patient's care ultimately, but it's like we lose that time to just pause and ask what's most important to them, like what, if I'm going to be the one making decisions for them in like a critical situation, like I need to know what's important. Like, how much do they value like a spouse or a loved one, like being at the bedside, like even just little things like that. So, yeah, from a patient perspective too, like that type of autonomy in your own care and being able to really communicate with your caregiver, I think is so valuable and unfortunately just not as readily available in our healthcare system today as we all wish it was.
Yeah. But I think that gives us like, we have that ability to change it and to be a part of that change. And I think that's one thing that I really want nurses to see and know is that just because this is the way it is, it doesn't mean that it needs to stay this way. And it also, if there's something that like kind of nags at you, right? Like, I want to make this better. I think there's an opportunity for this, whether it's like there should be a different product or there should be a different way of doing something. Like, if it's not doing that in your own organization, like definitely have the courage to take it out because chances are you're not the only one seeing and experiencing that. And so there's so much opportunity to make it better. And that's what I'd love for us as like an organization, as a profession, just to move forward with is like, let's be part of the solutions and making healthcare so much better because we see all the problems. We just have to do something about it.
Yes. And it's funny that you went there because I was just going to ask you, like, what would you say to nurses who like have ideas and feel hesitant to speak up on these ideas? And like maybe like to take what you just said one step further. Like if I'm a nurse at the bedside and I do have this idea, I want to do something with it. What's one tactical thing that they can do? Is it reaching out to someone and who is that someone? What is one tactical thing? Because I feel like sometimes we get stuck at that, like, I have this idea, but like, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what the next step is.
I think the very first step that you must accomplish is finding out whether someone else is experiencing the problem. That's one of the first things I did early on. So I had kind of noticed the problem, but before I left the hospital and really started building my company, I would talk to my patients and I would learn from them and listen and like, hey, would you pay for someone to come to your house? What would be important to you? So I used a lot of time to gather insight from people. And I think no matter what problem it is that you see, talking to other people, hey, what do you think about this? Get their thoughts and opinions, and then start to dive into the research a little bit and find out, okay, is there another way to do this? Have people tried? What does that look like? And so just really being super curious would be that first step for me of like diving deeper and digging into like, are there other people experiencing it? And like, what are the pros and cons and starting to become analytical? And then once you're like, okay, a lot of people experience this, like way more than I ever thought. So now what do I do? Then it's like, okay, now try to start finding the resources and really thinking about what can I do here? Like, what would I do? And like, how would I do it?
Yes. And that curiosity that you just described, the researching, the talking to people, like that sounds like a very simple thing. And just by doing that, you are well on your way to finding product market fit. And like that's something that you need to be successful in business and to get the resources and investments that you need. So I think that that's really great advice is something that you can do off the bat. I think that sometimes we overcomplicate what maybe the next step is or like the right way to do things in our mind. And sometimes it really is as simple as, asking questions and being curious.
Yeah, and oh my gosh, let go of perfectionism. Like I think I was like such a perfectionist before, and now I'm like, okay, if it's like 80% there, it's good, right? Like good enough is okay. And things don't need to be perfect. They're never like in startup world when you're building something, it's never going to be perfect. And if you have that mindset, it's only going to slow you down and it's going to prevent you from getting to where you need to be. So like starting off, like just let go. It's not going to be perfect and it's not meant to be. You're meant to learn and grow from it. So just making sure you give yourself grace for being open to like the failure and things not going the way you want is actually like really important.
Yeah, and you learn from each one of those failures. I was first introduced to the concept of an MVP, a minimum viable product, when I entered startup world, and that came as a stark contrast to my like critical care, like ICU nursing career, where being perfect is pretty important.
Wow.
When you're dealing with someone in like vasopressors and someone like kind of circling the drain, like perfection is important. And so I think what you just called out about that mindset shift of like, it doesn't have to be perfect when you're building something like this. Like you learn from the failures. It doesn't mean it's not like life or death failures, like it is a whole different type of trial and error and failures that you can actually learn from and iterate on and figure out how it's going to be successful the next time that you try.
Yeah. And I think that's why actually nurses are so, I think we're like best primed for becoming entrepreneurs and innovators because of like the skill set that we have, like being like the hub of everything related to someone's care. We are constantly managing and organizing so many things. We're really good at delegating and we have the ability to like to see things and go forward with them. I don't know. I think we're
Yes.
perfect. We're perfect entrepreneurs.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I wanted to comment on your recognition as female founder of the year and being a female founder and what that experience is like. Can you provide any commentary on kind of like any unique challenges that you faced as a female founder in healthcare and kind of what that reward and accomplishment has meant to you?
Oh my gosh, thank you for asking a question because it's so important to talk about, and I don't think we talk about it enough. I'm an introvert by nature, and so I've always been like most comfortable in the back of the room, and so just shifting that alone has been like a big process for me. But usually, when I walk into rooms, I'm maybe one of a handful of women. I'm usually one of the only women in the room. And for a long time, it was just this feeling of like, oh my gosh, do I belong? The imposter syndrome was like super real. Like, are these people going to listen to me? And so as a woman, there's this feeling of like, do I belong? And I've had to reframe that so that when I walk into rooms, before I walk in, actually, I tell myself, there is something that these men need to learn from me today. And instead of being like, oh gosh, like, do I belong here? So that's taken me some time to get to, but we need more females. Like, our voices are important. And it's not about one gender being better than another. It's the fact that we bring a different perspective. We see things differently, right? There's so much evidence that shows that women lead and build companies that are more financially stable, they are more sustainable, and they have better and are happier employers. Like that's really, really important. And so our voice matters. On top of that, I think there's like this addition too. I remember when I was first stepping into rooms and sharing what I was building, people would look at me and they would say, gosh, you're just so cute and you're just a nurse. Nobody's going to take you seriously. And there is also this element too that people look at me as a nurse and they don't see me as like a professional, again, because they don't know what nurses do. And I remember one presentation I gave that there was a professor and I gave this presentation and he was like, I can't imagine anyone else being the CEO of a company other than you. This was amazing, but I just can't believe how smart you are for a nurse. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like we have so much to teach people. Like if this very educated person, if this is his perception, like, gosh, we have a lot to do. And then even as a minority too, right? Like we know that in our startup world, like only 3% of venture capital goes to women maximum. It's even less for minority women. And we have to flip that. And so I see my role now as not just building this company, which is amazing, but I see it as hopefully shattering more ceilings and sharing with other women, other nurses, other minorities that you can do anything and just walk in the room. Like if there's not a table, like build your own table, bring your own chairs, do all the things, but you belong and you're important and you're valued. And so I think it's so important that there are some of us nurses who are in this space really like creating and building so that other nurses will see and hopefully become inspired and know that there is a place for them and there are people who've like been there before who are willing to help. Like it's not easy, but like I I know for the future, one of the big things I want to do is now help support other nurses, other women, other minorities, like help them build and grow. And that's like a way that I can help support just the growth of all of these amazing ideas that aren't being unleashed yet.
Yes. And I think that what you called out about women just bringing a different perspective is really important because it doesn't like you said, like it doesn't necessarily need to be this like women are better than men or vice versa or like this hierarchy of genders. Like it doesn't need to be that. What it needs to be is this like acceptance and understanding that like everyone is bringing their own perspective and unique value to the table. And so because of that, like there should be a seat for all of these people at the table. So I think that that is really important and I'm so glad that you kind of like shared that experience with us because something else that you mentioned that I think that I hear again and again is that sense of being just a nurse. And, I think that that is something that we hold on to internally sometimes. And there's definitely an external part of that too, of the way that people perceive nurses and our profession within the healthcare ecosystem. So I think that nurses doing what you're doing and nurses starting their own businesses and nursing using their voice and getting in the media, like all of these are things that we can do to really elevate the profession, which is mostly women, and so like I think that it's awesome that you're kind of like paving the way there and already looking ahead to how you can continue to like mentor and inspire to like ensure that this is something that like just keeps happening into the future.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it is, it's a scary place to be in building and, becoming an innovator and entrepreneur. But when you have people that are here to support you, like it changes the game. And I firmly believe like a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So the best thing that we can do is lift one another up and help support and encourage. And I know, again, it's kind of a mind shift from the lateral violence that is so prevalent in our working environments, but like we've got to change that too. Like if we want to make healthcare better, we have to like really support one another. And I think another important part with that too is just nursing. Like when I go to these conferences, when I'm in these communities, there are all these people who they just see the opportunity for money and they're building things, which is great, but they don't have healthcare experience. And again, they don't
Hmm.
necessarily think to reach out to nurses to be part of their team. And so I just think that we see and experience these problems, we're the best positioned to really come up with the right solutions. Like people will come to me and be like, hey, would you take a look at this thing that we're trying to build for nurses? And I'll look at it and I'm like, don't talk to me until you have like a nurse on your board or something, because like it's definitely not built for nurses. They're not going to like it, but they just see opportunity and they want to build. But I'm like, gosh, I wish more nurses were just like more courageous to hop out and build it on their own. They do it amazing.
Yes. And, all of that to say, like, whether it's a nurse who wants to be an entrepreneur and build their own thing, or just have an active voice in the development of these solutions, like, there is a place for everyone to do that. And actually, it's funny that we're talking about this because I'm sending out a newsletter today that has a lot of jobs in health tech and AI companies. And a point that I make in that newsletter is that you don't have to have tech experience. You don't have to have like a nursing informatics background. Like your value comes from your lived nursing experience and how intimately you know these healthcare workflows and the desired outcomes and what the current pain points are. Like that's where your value that you can bring to these companies is. And so I think that a lot of nurses hear like, oh, working in tech, like I'm not technical, I don't have that background. But it's like you totally have everything you need to be super valuable to that company and the way that these healthcare solutions are being built. Like we need nurses in these conversations in order for these solutions to be effective. And I think that like the the successful startups and founders are like realizing this, and that's why these positions for specifically for nurses and these companies exist. And the ones that aren't talking to nurses might learn the hard way that they should have been talking to nurses. But I think that's really important for nurses to realize like we need them in these conversations away from the bedside and the building of technology.
Yes, and it's fun, like, it's exciting, it's a whole different world to step into. Just like echoing your comment, like, your job is not to know how to code or engineer or anything about AI. Your job is to help support these people that truly do not understand healthcare, they do not understand nursing, and that's how you get to collaborate together, which is, I don't know, I think it's magical, it's really.
If you'd like to connect with Jasmine after today's show, you can find her on LinkedIn. You can visit her website at navinurses.com, or you can email her at jasmine@navinurses.com. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.